All right, it's our last day in Jerusalem. Just hit 500K last night. We have a few more things that we need to film for our larger projects we're working on here, but yeah, Q&A time. We're gonna hit it. Let's go. What's your opinion on the level of tack on sale in Jerusalem? I guess tacky stuff. And also, does it feel like a tourist trap? Yeah. Yeah, there's a lot of touristy, tacky stuff on sale. I mean, naturally, there's so many people that want to come through here that people want to make money on all the foot traffic. Can't blame them for that. But it is interesting that this is such a revered place, such a sacred place, but at the same time, it is a place for making money. It makes even an atheist feel like flipping over the merchant tables in the temple, I guess. At the same time, lots of food and gifts available, so it's really easy for someone like me who doesn't speak Hebrew and just wants to get a snack easily. It's all right. It really struck me the first time I was here, but I've really gotten used to it, and I don't think that I am as keen on just mocking how touristy it is now as I used to be. I kind of just want to let people have their good time and enjoy my time here. In one video, you talked about being the angry atheist earlier on in your journey. How and when does one work past this to be able to have constructive conversations with believers without getting defensive and angry? I think that anger often comes from a place of vulnerability, isolation, marginalization. Addressing that is often the way to overcome this angry atheist phase. I was angry early on because I just didn't have people to support me. When I expressed that my opinions were now different, I was invalidated and it just became a fight. People didn't validate me regardless of who I was or just treat me the same way. It sucked. Of course I was angry. Once I addressed that though and found people who would support me just for being me, it didn't have anything to do with my religious positions, that's the thing that helped me just quell the fire, you know? It helped me stop feeling like I needed to fight so hard. And I had what I needed. I had a support system. If you're still feeling angry after however many years, try to make that support system. I think that's the thing to really focus on. Now, when it comes to conversations with believers, if you want to stop feeling so defensive or even particularly emotional at all, what worked for me is just getting educated on religious history and the psychology of religion. If you understand that people that believe are products of their environment, just as you are, it's hard to let that get to you in the same way. You understand when they're expressing your beliefs, why they believe what they believe. You understand the history of that belief. It actually becomes rather interesting to talk to a diversity of people after you've done that. For me, it's helped me to just have calm, rational conversations with people who believe, and the anger is not something that I'm having to fight when having conversations with them anymore. Especially since you're in Jerusalem, do you have an appreciation for Christian, Jewish, or Muslim art and architecture? If so, what parts? Yeah, absolutely, of course. I find all of the above beautiful in different ways, although I will say that perhaps it has to do with it being different from anything I saw in my upbringing, but Islamic art and architecture really speaks to me. It's something that I find incredibly mesmerizing. It might be that Islamic art doesn't depict living things often, and there are certain theological restrictions on art like that. So many of the patterns are very based on geometry. They're patterns, they're repeating patterns, and sometimes they're very lifelike even though they're not depicting anything that's alive. Having such strict limitations on your art style sometimes can produce incredible things. I mean, it is a little weird, I think, to compare Islamic art to the music of the White Stripes, but Jack White limited himself quite a bit in that band, and that's why so much of the music that came out of it was so incredible. There are limitations on Islamic art, and it was the limitations that ended up making such an incredible and unique style. How have your opinions and feelings towards Israel and Jerusalem changed since leaving the faith? I never really understood the hype. Even as a Christian, I thought that visiting the places where miracles supposedly happened made them less believable. To be clear, I've never been here as a Christian, never been to Israel or Jerusalem as a believer of any kind. I only came here in 2019 for the first time, and I'd been an atheist for a couple years at that point, so I don't have a frame of reference in that regard. I also feel like visiting these places makes the miracles that supposedly happen here feel less believable. That was definitely my first impression. That's how I still feel about it. But we're on this trip with some believers as well as non-believers. And I think that regardless, your biases are going to get confirmed. If you come in here thinking that there is some kind of evidence here for miracles just in the fact that these places are standing, you're just going to feel like they're more real. If you feel like, hey, these are just buildings, and if you ground this more in reality, the miraculous stories seem less believable, you'll feel more that way when you visit. Biases get confirmed. It doesn't matter if you're an atheist or not. One thing I've been curious about is your opinion on the utility of religious practice on human psychology, regardless of the truthfulness of the ideology. Founding myths definitely create a shared identity among people. I mean, the Western Wall unites people who have massive disagreements, yet they all still come here to venerate the same site. And I do think there's some kind of community that people build in that action. It doesn't matter exactly what the Western Wall really is in reality. It binds people completely regardless. The truthfulness is not as important as just the effect. Rituals, though, those really bind people together. When people cooperate in motion together, I mean, even if people just do repetitive motions together with no religious significance, people tend to get along better, they act more similarly, they regard each other more highly. So if there's something on top of just shared motion, shared action with other people, there's belief on top of that and intertwined with that, almost nothing you could possibly do could bind you to your community and your community to you anymore. Rituals are binding. Obviously, with that kind of utility, great things can be achieved with ritual. I mean, incredible actions of social justice or even defense of marginalized people have happened because people have come together, worked together, and part of that is ritual, chanting, slogans. That can be great, but obviously, horrible military action and religious abuse can also be a result of ritual. Ritual is not the problem, it's a tool, and the way that you use a tool determines whether it's a good or bad thing in that context. Would you ever consider doing some not so calm content? They go on to say that they like when I include more humor and maybe a bit of ridicule. When I step outside my normal calm style, they do enjoy it. I know that my fellow skeptics and non-believers like when I do that. I get a lot of comments saying that they like the humor that I included, they like the joke that I made about Kenneth Copeland and him being creepy or whatever. And I don't mind doing that when someone is in a position of power and they're being abusive. But outside of that, I tend to think what I'm trying to do here is spread some rationality and some understanding across like tribal lines. And if I'm engaging in just ridicule and confirming the biases of my audience all the time, I'm not sure if I'm accomplishing that goal. I know I could get way more views than I do now if I engaged in more mockery, but I just don't know that I'm willing to do that except in very, very specific instances. I think I'm going to keep the content as it is. One of the reasons why I think this channel has succeeded long term, you know, I just hit 500K, is that I have stayed really focused on the original goals of the channel and not deviated from that. I'm not just interested in confirming the biases of skeptics. People who are not skeptics like to watch this channel too because my content is for anyone who just wants to think a little bit more complexly and critically. I need to keep that up. This is not quite a question here, but they say that they're a teen stuck in a Hasidic community / cult, and they're wondering if I'd ever make a video going into a Hasidic community. This is a very Orthodox Jewish community. Now, I haven't gone into an Orthodox or a Hasidic community exactly. I've gone into an ultra-Orthodox community before and made a video actually with one of my camera guys right here, Jeremy. Yeah, we made a video there. It was our first video together, and it was a learning experience, but I think it's still valuable to watch. Not quite Hasidic, but again, if you want to see that ultra-Orthodox community and just what we were learning about that, go check that out. I'm struggling with something and hope you might be able to offer some insight. How are you able to break that final chain tethering you to Christianity? Many of us who have been enmeshed since birth feel a strong tether, and I know you can understand how hard it is to break that final chain. If you want to remove yourself from Christianity, if you want to get distance from it, I think the best thing that you can possibly do to do that is just find new community. If you're surrounded by people who are Christian and are kind of holding you into that community, then yeah, you can keep those bonds, but form bonds with people elsewhere. Find people that will want to be friends with you and hang out with you, and it has nothing to do with Christianity or your religious beliefs. Just find support outside of Christianity. That's the best thing that you can do. When it comes to thinking about Christianity or having values that come from Christianity, deriving your values from that, I don't think that's necessarily a bad thing. If you want to break that, if you want to do something else, that's fine. I encourage you to just study something else then. But if you still are identifying with Christianity in some way, even though you don't believe in the miracles, you don't necessarily believe that Jesus really came back from the dead, whatever, it's okay. I mean, Christianity is a part of my identity too, even though I'm an atheist. You can be any distance you want, as long as you feel okay with that, you're good. As an ex-Mormon, I'm interested in hearing any experiences you've had with Mormons and your take on the religion as a whole. Every Mormon I've ever met has been incredibly nice. I've actually met more Mormons through my interest in skating than I have through anything else, so it's kind of interesting. I guess Mormons are nice people who also like to skate. At one point in my life, I actually thought that God was calling me to get a degree in counseling psychology so that I could eventually open my own counseling practice in Utah and convert Mormons. Now I see how incredibly unethical that would be. I would never do that now, but religion can make you think some very strange things. Glad I did not do that. A final note here. I think that a lot of people look at Mormonism and think, this is so absurd. I mean, you found golden plates buried in your backyard, basically, and then you translated those golden plates with a magic rock and a hat, and this was authored by this lost civilization of Israeli Native Americans. It seems so far-fetched and just hilarious. But I think the reason why we think of it that way is because Mormonism is so recent, and imagining all of these crazy tall tales happening so recently, or at least surfacing so recently, it feels less believable. But when we're 2,000 years removed from all of these crazy stories, we think, oh, well, amazing things happened in the past, and we don't think about them through a contemporary lens. Mormonism is not really any wackier than any other faith, in my opinion. What are your favorite Indian dishes to order and make, and what food in Israel have you liked? I think I would have to say I like chana masala, just covering a whole bunch of samosas with tons of chutney on top. That would be my favorite Indian food. As far as the food I like in Israel, I mean, you really just can't beat falafel, but the vegetables are so much more fresh here that like anything with fresh vegetables is so much better than any American food. It's pretty great. Some of your recent videos seem to hint at a psychedelic experience you may have had. If you're comfortable, can you talk about your experiences with psychedelics or your opinion on how they can affect a secular spiritual worldview? I can say that I've had some big experience with psychedelics. I mean, I smoke weed, I guess, and I've had experiences that were definitely heightened from that, but I haven't gone further than that. What I meant to say in those videos is that I do think that psychedelics can be something that allow you to kind of open your mind up a little bit, get creative, come up with new understandings of the same issues that you've been struggling with. I think that it allows you to think about things in new ways, and that's an incredible thing to be able to have at your disposal. Why not take advantage of that responsibly? Friends of mine who have taken psychedelics and had various trips, have said that those experiences have been incredibly meaningful to them, and while not changing their worldview necessarily, they have allowed them to gain perspective on very personal things. And I don't think that that's something that we need to stigmatize. And in fact, I think we need to continue to research the possible therapeutic effects of psychedelics. Do you ever find yourself defending how messed up Scripture is when discussing morality and Scripture with progressive Christians? As an ex-Christian atheist who has gone through the deconstruction process of fundamentalist to progressive Christian to atheist, I often find that discussing with progressives means pointing out their attempts to cherry pick and selectively read the Bible doesn't represent a wider view of what Scripture says. The weird thing is that I feel like I have to almost defend a more literal or reactionary interpretation of Scripture, at least to help illustrate to them the problem with pretending fundamentalists are out to lunch and not honestly interpreting the Bible. How do you handle that? The first thing I have to clarify is that I don't ever feel like I'm defending a more messed up version of Scripture or something like that, because I don't find myself in defending certain interpretations as the end-all be-all, the theological truth. I like to describe different interpretations as ones that different camps take, right? Certain theological interpretations are not inherent, they belong to certain people groups. I think one thing you might be getting at with this question is sometimes progressive Christians will kind of ignore the fact that certain interpretations are taken, certain people do read Scripture in a certain way in order to oppress other people. People read the writings of Paul and think that homosexuality is not okay, it's this horrible abomination and it shouldn't be allowed. That's something that you can plausibly read in that Scripture looking at it through a modern lens, sure. But I don't think that we should have to feel like we have to defend that interpretation as one that should be taken. This all comes down to how you define specific words, what values you have. There's so many things that go into Scripture interpretation that who's to say that if you're looking at it through a theological lens, that any interpretation is more valid than any other. That is the point that if you're talking skepticism, that I tend to emphasize. I think one of the biggest failures of the atheist movement or the new atheist movement, or at least those that have kind of been in leadership for so long, is acting like the Bible or Scripture has one particular interpretation and that interpretation is very literal. It doesn't make you a fundamentalist like people like maybe Reza Aslan claim. I don't think that Sam Harris is a fundamentalist or something, but if you interpret Scripture, if you read Scripture as being so literal and you read it basically like a fundamentalist in order to combat that, I think it betrays your religious illiteracy a lot of the time if you don't make the clarification that, of course, you can interpret Scripture in really any way if you take a theological stance to it. We need to make sure and represent certain interpretations of Scripture as those that other people hold, that some people hold, as possible interpretations, not one true interpretations. If you're doing that, I would strongly, strongly urge you to please go read about Christian or Jewish or Islamic or just religious history so that you understand how complex these things are. And there's not just one true interpretation, just like there's not one true faith. Okay, back at the Airbnb for the last couple of questions. What beliefs of yours have changed since you started making videos? It's a very good one. I think the two biggest changes are, number one, I used to call myself an anti-theist. I thought that having a belief in the supernatural or in gods was this inherently harmful thing. And I've talked about the reasons why I don't think this way a bit more in depth in a previous video. I'll just link it. You guys can check that out if you'd like. But that's a big change. I don't think it's inherently harmful to believe in something supernatural or to believe in gods. I still think that there are potential pitfalls there, like there are with many different kinds of beliefs. And of course, I don't think that those beliefs are often based on sound argumentation personally, but I can't say that those beliefs are just inherently harmful as I used to. I think that's it's a rather immature viewpoint that I can't hold to anymore. And 2, I am a vegan or sentientist now. I identified kind of as a secular humanist when I started my channel. And one of the reasons why is because when I left Christianity, the first group that took me in and made me realize that it was okay to not be a Christian was a group of secular humanists out in East Texas. They were great people who just showed me love regardless of what I believed. And I still have the vast majority of my opinions in common with secular humanists, but that's not the label that describes me the best, because again, I have another video where I describe this, I'll link it, but I've changed my mind about largely ethics, and that's why I'd call myself a sentientist now. What's the next chapter for GMS? That's difficult. I feel like I've been flying by the seat of my pants for so long, honestly. In 2021, I guess maybe it started in 2020, I was just struggling a lot personally with identity and figuring out not necessarily who I was then, but who I wanted it to be in, I guess, my public persona or brand or whatever. Yeah, I wanted to continue to show empathy and encourage people to have productive conversations, that kind of thing, but if I want to reach more people, and I do, then there's a lot of ethical concerns in that. I could make a lot of response videos, those get tons of views. A lot of my top viewed videos are response videos, but they also sometimes start flame wars and aren't really that productive. So there's been a lot of ethical considerations I've had to make going forward. I think that something that I can do to reach a broader audience, keep this going, but stay productive and really stay true to my original goals and values is work with scholars more. I've this year already been working with more scholars. I've started working with scholars, I should say, and those videos have done well. There's kinks to iron out, but I'd like to continue doing that for sure. And then I guess the next part is if I can make more highly produced, high production value stuff with these guys, then that would be pretty cool. It's, every time I do something new, it's a learning experience, but you guys have been really generous, gracious as I have learned and made mistakes, and I'm feeling optimistic about where we're going. I never, ever thought I would be at 500K, that's for sure. But wherever we go from here, I think it's going to be great. I'm really excited.
Nice.
Cool.
Cutting.
End of the Q&A.
Yeah. Thanks for watching, guys. Patreon, subscribe. Resources in description for apostates in need, as always. I hope you like the upcoming Israel videos.
Sweet.
Nice.
Hey, what's up, everybody? My name is Jeremy. I'm one of the cam ops that went with Drew on this trip to Israel to help him make this content. The other cam op is Derek. His socials are below. I have a YouTube channel called Jeremy Levy, my name, where I talk about cinema cameras, tech, and I make cinematic nature videos, that kind of stuff. I'm just getting started. I don't have a following, but if that sounds of vague interest to you, please go to my channel and check out specifically the A Winter in Iceland video that I recently made, which is very pretty with music and all that. Finally, my video production company is Aurora. It's a New York City-based company. We have a full production package, red cameras, black magic, lights, audio, pretty much everything you would need for a basic to high-end production. So if you happen to be someone watching that is vaguely interested in that, then please check out my links. All right, that's all I got. Next time I will light this plug properly, but for now I'm busy finishing Drew's Q&A video. So, till next time, peace out. Thank you.